How y'all doing? So I'm going to do another one of these cooking things. Certainly not a lesson, but I did want to share with you my absolute favorite recipe. This was the first thing I ever cooked where I followed the instructions out of a cookbook religiously. And I was just shocked how good it is. It's a very simple Irish stew, but there's so many ways to screw this up where the meat comes out tough or it's just not nice. And so I found that if I followed this recipe, you can't fail. And the recipe actually comes from this cookbook. I do not have any shitters in it. The New Best recipe, and it really is an amazingly thoughtful cookbook and really, really simple to follow. So to start, the ingredients, and I think it's really important to have everything set out, even though it's going to take some time to use all of the ingredients. This way you're not running back and forth and you kind of take some of the panic out of cooking. I've got 3 pounds of chuck roast that the butcher has cubed for me in 1 to 1.5 inch squares, 4 red potatoes, peeled and cubed, 4 large carrots, about 1/2 inch in diameter, 2 large onions, diced, 4 cloves of garlic, 3 tablespoons of flour, dried thyme, parsley, 1 cup of red wine. The rule about cooking with wine is if you don't want to drink it on its own, you shouldn't be cooking with it either, and 2 cups of chicken stock. 2 bay leaves, and then the only ingredient that's not here are the peas, and you make them separately. They're not really part of the stew. So, let's get started. So I'm gonna put my stovetop on to medium high. The oven is set at 300 degrees. Lower middle rack is where the pot is gonna go into. And so I'm gonna let this warm up for a little while. I want it to get kind of hot before I add the oil. So this might take a second. This is where I'm supposed to be able to tell a funny story, but I never have a funny story when I need it. The utensils that you're gonna need are a wooden spoon and your tongs for the meat. Now, the 3 pounds of meat will never cook in this in one go, so you have to do it in stages. In the recipe, it actually says you'll need to do it twice. I have always found I needed to do it 3 times. So what I do is I brown the meat on all sides. It takes about 5 minutes in total. You use the tongs to flip it over. When they're done, you put the meat in the bowl. You don't put a paper towel or anything. You want to keep all the juices because you're going to pour all that back into the stew. And again, it takes me about 3 times. And what's nice about this is it goes in stages. Once the meat's done, then we'll address the onions and some of the spices. And, well, you'll see. We're going to add the oil now. And just about a tablespoon. You get your oven mitts, which I will need shortly. And for now, just swirl it around the pan. Make sure it's evenly coated. And you want to give the oil a chance to heat up. And you can just feel it. And if it lightly starts to smoke, you should absolutely start cooking. And we're getting there. So, just gonna come over, start taking the beef, putting it in an orderly fashion in the pot, never touching each other. And again, as you get to the end of the pot, as you're laying out your meat, generally the front will be done, so you can start flipping right away. And I think everybody, certainly in North America, has realized that this has been a really brutal winter. I cannot think of a better dish on a Sunday night that'll bring a group of really cold people together. And that's enough for now. And I'm going to just start to flip at the other end. And you'll see that it's already browning. I'm not trying to cook the meat through. I'm just trying to coat it and get it cooked off on its sides. And again, each batch will ultimately take about 5 minutes. You want to get the sides done too. In the end, I know it sounds counterintuitive, but it actually ends up protecting the moistness of the meat and allows it to cook through. And again, the reason why I started doing this is because I had a lot of friends that weren't very comfortable with cooking, and when I started, I wasn't either. And I used to experience a lot of panic. That I wasn't getting everything cooked or right, or fast enough, or everything wasn't prepared. Having all of the ingredients ready to go makes a huge difference. But also there's nothing you can really do too wrong with this except for overcook it. So just keep flipping them over. The meat in the context of the recipe is going to have 2 hours. That's my dog right there, and she is absolutely thrilled that I'm making this. And I just want to get these sides done like that. That one's ready to go. And if you see an area of one of the pieces of meat that's still a little pink or red, don't panic, that will cook off. But what you really don't want to do is overcook the meat. So it's this simple, about 5 minutes, and then the second this is finished, the batch is in the bowl. Take the oil, put another teaspoon in, put your oven mitts back on because this pot will be hot by then, and swirl it around and repeat. And again, for me, with the 3 pounds in a Dutch oven this size, it has always taken me three passes at it, not 2. So don't panic about that either. And what I did with the meat also, which I forgot to tell you, is that I season it very generously with salt and pepper. Again, I'm not cooking the meat off here, but that's going to have such an effect on the broth and everything that the stew becomes. And if you come in and look at the pan right now, you'll see a lot of brown bits. Those are really, really, really important. And because that's going to be just an incredible amount of flavor. So as soon as the meat is finished, we're going to add the onions in, and the wooden spoon is there so that we can really scrape up those bits, because that really is where all the flavor is. And again, the only thing that's more complicated about this recipe than the other recipes that I've shown you is that there's just more ingredients involved, and so you have to manage that. But again, the measurements are there for you, and I can go over those again in a minute. Once you have all that prep work done, it becomes incredibly simple. Two more pieces, and then that'll be my 3rd batch for the meat. And this will repeat 3 times, and I'm going to probably edit this part out so that we don't bore you to death. And each batch of meat cooks a little faster just because the pan invariably gets a little hotter. And so you have to kind of watch out for that. And once you finish putting all the meat in, go straight back to the first pieces of meat that you put in, because I guarantee you they will be ready to flip. And when you're getting your meat and you start to, sometimes you'll want to cut from the butcher, you want to still cut some pieces down. don't cut out the fat. The fat will dissolve in the stewing process. Again, it's such a source of flavor that you really do want to keep it. And you can see in here, there's areas of the meat that are pink, that are still red. It's not a concern. I've browned almost all the sides. It's not something you have to panic about, and you will certainly not be dealing with meat that is undercooked at the end of the process, which is almost 2 hours. And more oil. And then we'll put in the last of our meat. And that is the dog Shirley Jean. And I mean, it's amazing how fast the fragrance from this starts to fill the house. And it just feels, it feels like a real family meal. Again, it serves 6 to 8 people. So for the family Sunday dinner, it's absolutely perfect. And it's one of the few things that I'll make that my grandkids won't fight over. This is something that they actually all really like. So it services all different ages in the family. And as I said before, literally start flipping again, they're ready to go. And I've made this dish so many times, but you'll notice through this, I will still reference the recipe. It is absolutely crucial that you follow it, and it's a lot to remember. So. And again, there's absolutely nothing to be panicked about. We're just repeating these steps. It's not like a souffle or anything complicated like that. It really is very simple. Okay, I am now going to reduce the heat on my stovetop down to medium, and I'm going to add the last of my oil. Swirl the pan, let that get good and hot. I'm going to take my onions, 2 onions chopped coarsely, and I'm going to add them in the pan. And then I'm going to take some salt. It calls for a 1/4 teaspoon, 3 good shakes, and you're good to go. And now we're going to take the spoon. You might want to keep a glove on. We're going to take the spoon and start to really stir vigorously. And we want the onions to really break down. So we're going to get them way beyond sweating. We want them to change color. They're going to get very, very soft. And this is going to take about 5 minutes. And trust the timing. If you don't feel comfortable about judging it based on the look of it or anything like that, trust the timing. 5 minutes will do this perfectly. And as I say that, I'm looking over at the clock to see exactly where I'm at. And the point of the stirring really vigorously is all those brown bits. See right here? They're all starting to get pulled off of the pan and back into the onion. And what's amazing about this stew is the first time I made it, I just thought I felt like I was making an onion soup. When you're finished, you won't see an onion. It'll break down completely in this process, and it's there for flavor and for some consistency for the broth. But I was absolutely shocked that when the stew was finished, that I never saw an onion. So, and I've got a few seconds. So now I'm going to just let that cook off a bit, and I'm going to just recheck where I'm at in the cookbook. And here we are. 4 to 5 minutes. Okay, so now I'm gonna have to add the garlic for 30 seconds and then very quickly stir in the flour and cook lightly for another 1 to 2 minutes. And this process right here, especially with the stirring right away, buy myself some time to kind of remind myself what I'm doing. And again, one of the things that turned me off the most about cooking was just the panic of it. And I found that if you've got everything that you need prepared, that panic can go away pretty quick. So I'm going to give these a couple more seconds. And in goes the garlic. And literally, I will just count this off. I will just count to 30 while I'm doing it because I trust the timing of this recipe so much. And there we go. And now we're going in with the flour. And this is the trick to this recipe. This is why I think the meat stays tender. There was no flour on the meat. I've seen recipes like that before. It's its own separate entity. It goes in with the onions like this, and I think it's one of the great secrets of this recipe. And you're going to watch this start to get really thick. So when we add the red wine, that's going to be, and the chicken stock, this flour will start to thicken that by the time it gets in there. And you just want to cook this down. Again, you'll start to see it get really chunky. But again, just trust the 1 to 2 minutes. And just kind of slowly count that off in your head. And you can see here, it's almost making a paste. And that's exactly what it's supposed to do. Okay, so now where are we? Okay, so we're now going to add the wine. And I'm going to do this in kind of 2 parts. But what I want to accomplish here is that when the wine is added, this should get very, very thick. And then I add the chicken stock, and that will be the basis of the broth. And you can start to see this really thickening up. Okay, now I'm going to move over to the chicken stock. And then I'm just also going to check one last time how much they recommend for the chicken stock. Okay, and we're just going to bring this to a simmer. So I have really made sure that this has gotten thick. And again, if you have to go back and read the book, nothing is so urgent that it can't give you 5-10 seconds to figure out where you are. With the chicken stock, you should add this in gradually and let it build. Try and get all those pieces of onion and everything off the side of the pan back into the broth. As soon as I finish adding the last of the chicken stock, I'm going to bring it to a simmer, And I'm going to add what should normally be 2 bay leaves. Mine are quite small right now, so I'm adding 3 bay leaves and the dried thyme. And then I'm going to put the meat back in, and we're going to put it in the oven at 300 degrees, and it will stay there for an hour. And then we'll take it back out, and we'll add the potatoes and the carrots, and then the parsley and the peas come in at the very end. So we're going to let this come just a light bubble. Make sure I've done absolutely everything I'm supposed to. And the cool thing about that, you know, that you've got an hour, then you add something else, and then you've got another hour. It gives you time to kind of take care of all your dishes and everything else. So when you actually go to serve this meal, it is in fact done. And the reason why I didn't add a paper towel to this bowl to dry off the meat is because, again, I want the juices from the meat from this bowl to all go back into the stew. And you can see it starting to simmer here. And I'm going to let it just cook off a little more. But if you see this, you're more than welcome to start throwing in your thyme. Try and spread it out throughout the pot. Throw in the bay leaves. Again, one at this end, one at that end, one in the middle. Now I'm going to bring the meat. I'm going to put it back into the stew. Try and get the meat as submerged as I can. Great. And then have a look. It should look like this before you put it in the oven. Certain pieces will be above the water. I promise you it will move around, they will cook off. We'll put the top back on, check the time, so I really do know exactly when I need to pull it out. And into the oven we go. Middle lower rack, and it's absolutely imperative that the rack be level. Perfect. Do some dishes, and we'll see you in about an hour. Okay, we're ready to take it out. Now, the recipe says an hour. If you do it an hour and 5 minutes, an hour and 10 minutes, it only gets more tender. So again, no panic. Now, as you look at the dish, it is not the most attractive dish yet. We dress it up at the end, and it's gonna look beautiful. So now we add our carrots and our potatoes. Grab your wooden spoon. Try and get it as submerged as possible. And this is just such a hearty meal. This will feed 8 people comfortably, and everyone will want to take a nap. Okay, looks good. Don't forget to put your oven mitts back on because this pot is hot as hell. And back in we go. For another hour. We'll see you in a minute. No, we'll see you in an hour. Idiot. So we are finished with our second hour. I'm going to pull the stew out. And this is really important. even though the recipe says an hour on each side, everybody's oven is different. So what I suggest is that you test the meat, and it should literally be able to cut with a fork. So I'm gonna do exactly that with a fork. Take one of the pieces of meat, put it here on the cutting board, and it literally should be that tender. Awesome. Okay, so now we get to dress it, make it a little better looking. 1.5 cups of peas, give it some color, and the parsley. Mix those two up. A little more parsley on the top. My dog Shirley Jean now knows it's done. And for some bizarre reason, she thinks she's gonna get some. And then I keep a little parsley for the plating. And I'll show you that in 1 second. When you're finished with the stew, taste the broth, season with salt and pepper to your liking. As the stew starts to cool down, it will get thicker and thicker and thicker. In fact, there have been many times where I've made it at night, put it in the fridge, and not served it for a whole day. One of my favorite ways to eat it. So all of these things are up to you. But you can serve this right away, right out of the gate, as it's finished. Be very careful because it is incredibly hot, especially if you're feeding children. And there's a lot of different ways you can garnish it. Even though that there are potatoes in the stew itself, there have been times where I have put it over a bed of mashed potatoes or white rice. But the thing that I tend to like the most is I will find a really good French baguette or a loaf of bread. And because this is such a hearty meal, it can take a pretty rustic bread, but I just take a few pieces like this for the gravy, and just dress it like this. And then I'll just take the extra parsley that I have here and just give it a little color. And that is my favorite Irish stew. If you do take the chance to make this, I hope you enjoy it as much as I do. Talk to you all later. I'm eating.